So, the patriarchy has gone back in time and invaded the Stone Age. An article on theconversation.com asks, where were all the women in the Stone Age? It's bad enough that the social justice warriors have taken to accusing everyone of racism, misogyny, transphobia, and sexism. But now they are attempting to gain new ground by retroactively attacking people from the past. The article states, were there any women around in the Paleolithic era? If popular culture is any guide, you'd think not. And even archaeology itself has a long way to go to address a deeply ingrained bias towards men. So says Darren Curnow, Chief Investigator and Co-Leader of Education and Engagement Program ARC Center of Excellence for Australian Biodiversity and Heritage, and Director of Paleontology, Geobiology and Earth Archives Research Center, UNSW, I guess that's University of South Wales. I really can't say I understand what he's saying. I get it, just another thing to blame the big bad patriarchy for. The article continues, it's obvious that without women, Homo sapiens could hardly be here today, but our cultural imaginings of the Paleolithic evoke images of man the hunter or man the toolmaker, because that's how our evolution has largely been portrayed by scientists and artists. It is indeed obvious that without two biological sexes we would not be here today to whine and complain about the patriarchy. Since the author holds such an esteemed position relevant to the subject, you'd think that he would be well aware that we have extremely little knowledge of who and what people of the ancient past were. Your educated guess is about as good as anyone else's. You see, behavior does not fossilize. It is certainly very, very possible that Paleolithic culture shared the hunting and tool making, but we consider the people of the recent past to be anatomically nearly identical to modern humans. Because of sexual dimorphism, it is well known that in general men are larger and stronger than women. Not all, but in general. So, if your daily existence is contingent on the fitness of the most able hunter, then you may very well not only pick the male, but quite possibly the most able of the men in your tribe. So it is very possible that the portrayal by scientists and artists could be exact. But of course, no one really knows, including you. The author of the article invites us to Google Stone Age women and see what pops up under the Images tab. Is this what the noble science of paleontology is interested in? Googling images of Raquel Welch because that proves something? I do have a bit of a hint for you. When you become obsessed with popular culture, it can drag down your level of professionalism. Look how well that's going for Anita Sarkeesian and her quest to discover the evil sin of the patriarchy in pop culture. The best thing to do here is to open a noteworthy scientific journal and see what is being said about the ancient past. You may very well see serious debate over a fairly serious topic. That is, scientists talking about science. The article goes on, but these are more a reflection of modern male fantasy and 1960 notions of gender roles than they are a true sampling of the Stone Age. Are they? How do you know? And think for a minute about those big history narratives about the Stone Age. Scientists unwittingly perpetuate male bias in these overly simplistic stories. Humans invented stone tools, began to hunt animals with them or chase them down with our running abilities, and started to cook and eat them with fire. As a consequence, we evolved our large brains, invented culture, and began to speak and make music and art. These activities are routinely associated with men, tools, hunting, fire, art, etc. So logically, men must have made the big advances that led to the evolution of Homo sapiens, while women were peripheral players in the evolutionary endgame. Our large brains did evolve, and indeed did our culture as well. But remember, your premise is based solely on your interpretation of pop culture bias. It is possible that either of the two sexes, or both, could have been responsible for the big advances you mentioned, but reality is neither enhanced nor diminished by portrayals in popular media. You may very well be correct in your assessment of Stone Age culture based upon the media. However, I find it difficult to even associate this concept when you're using cartoon characters like the Flintstones as an example. Even the term hunter-gatherer has rightly been criticized by feminist archaeologists who in the 1970s and 80s argued that gatherer-hunter would be a more appropriate nomen given that in most groups women provided the majority of food that sustained them. Does any of this matter? Sure it does. We limit understanding of our collective past whenever we take a narrow, biased approach to investigating it. And in this case, we're missing half the picture. The fact that anyone would bother to care whether a hunter-gatherer needs to be flipped to gather-hunter is, to be sure, trivial at best. This is an example of a truly biased approach dressed up with animal skins to adorn our ancient past. In the article, it goes on to say that it's not easy to get at the issue of the roles played by the two genders or how gender itself was even constructed in the past, which is spot on since gender roles do not fossilize. He goes on to rightly state, more often than not, we have no idea. He makes assumptions about the roles that Paleolithic men and women had. The possibly correct assumption that women were gatherers or baked bread. Here he stumbles directly into the talking points of the patriarchy, assuming that women do all the domestic chores such as cooking. It's well known that in most hunter-gatherer groups, women use grinding stones to process food. Grinding stones have been found in Israel dating back to at least 12,000 years ago, associated with ovens, suggesting the routine making of dough and baking of bread. So, the signatures of women's work shows that bread making and baking, and even eating grains and wheat, date well back into the Paleolithic. It looks like we need a few of those feminist archaeologists to wag their angry finger at the sky. Look, I think it would be quite lovely if we one day discovered that early societies were matrilineal and women had the most important role in the advancement of humanity. This is not a race to see who comes out the winner of our ancient past. He talks about assumptions of the sex of the ancient artist, which to me is odd, although he could be correct. But to me it's strange because when we marvel at the incredible cave art of the distant past, I don't recall the paintings were credited to Mr. Org, but more of a display of the sophistication of our ancient human ancestors. He goes on to reference the Venus statues of olden days. Both portray women in full voluptuous beauty, exaggerated breasts, buttocks, and vulvae, with large pads of fat around the hips, abdomen, and thighs. Today we'd describe them as being obese. But in the past, who knows? A body form to aspire to have, since we have no way of even guessing whether the voluptuous beauties were an honest portrayal of the female form back then, or could it be any number of valid representations, such as what an invented goddess would appear to us as, since we as a species are pretty good at inventing gods in all forms. They could very well represent the form of a desired childbearing shape, which would suit the feminists quite nicely to be able to find our Paleolithic patriarchy guilty of sexism and misogyny by way of their art. Since these statues appear frequently, it is indeed possible that they depict women as they were, not necessarily as they were desired. I'd hate to think that was the cave art version of Playboy magazine. The statue shown in the article implies that they must have looked something like a roast chicken. He goes on to say, one thing's for certain, they throw our modern notions of beauty right out the window and make us realize that ideas of female body image are not static. I don't believe they throw anything out the window. Other than your spell checker, nobody alive knows what these statues and figures represent, least of all you and me also. Maybe they had rock stars back then, or they are like our Betty Boop figurine. Nobody alive believes that Betty Boop with her enormous head represents any woman ever. Could it be that these were created as pranks to make fun or fat shame overweight cave girls? We don't know. He goes on to say, and they bring home the self-evident truth that women played a major role in past societies and of course our evolutionary story. We archaeologists need to work much harder to discover more about that role. Once again, maybe women played every important role in human history. One thing that will not help make paleontology or archaeology a useful science is to infect it with predetermined outcomes that decide the answer before the question is asked. I have mentioned several times in this video that It's impossible at this point to know what was in the mind of people tens of thousands of years ago. Before written history, before there were any records kept, the only thing we have is fossils and some artwork and remains. We can imply behaviors from cultures that we're familiar with, and we're making a guess. It's just a guess at what people were doing and why they were doing it. But I think this is a ridiculous attempt by a social justice warrior to project into the past the same nonsense that they're bombarding us with today. And here's a free tip for you, Darren. Stay away from the gender studies courses. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you didn't, say so in the comments below. If you liked it, hit like, subscribe. Thank you for watching.